May 18th, 2023. The first Moosion Impossible has its red carpet event with an after-school showing which kinda had a low attendance. Nonetheless, work on a sequel had already began, plans for a trilogy and a sequel titled Moosion Impossible: The Musical. And so began the crazy development of what soon became Moosion Impossible: Cowabunga. Development. The concept of making a continuation to Moosion Impossible was a no-brainer. But the ideas it went through was something which took a lot of time to tie down. When the first Moosion Impossible was written and nearly made it into production back in fall of 2021, the film was going to end with a cliffhanger, which was going to imply a Prison Break sequel. The idea did stick around, and was left in mind when Moosion Impossible did manage to finally reach production in spring of 2023 with a very minimal changes to the original script. But unlike its predecessor, Moo 2 spent a large sum of its development going through immense story changes. Pitch 1, The Musical. The original pitch for Moosion Impossible 2 was going to be a musical prison break film titled Moosion Impossible: The Musical. The film pitch was developed throughout the production of the first Moosion Impossible and partway through the summer following in hopes of a November 2023 release. The film would have been a lot more in line with the first film in tone and style. Protagonists were going to be swapped around though this time, with Richard Bad Guy taking lead. Writer-director Tristen Fry found it much more enjoyable being a side character, so Agent Josh would have moved more to the side with the main focus being on Richard Bad Guy, with an arc on Richard embracing his inner feelings for the cow and accepting that he may not be at heart a bad guy. The whole crew would be sent to a high-security prison, where the jail warden is a big music fan. Richard Bad Guy was going to work towards a musical show put on for the jail every year, where he would sing a song which made him realize the fault in him, that he isn't really a bad guy. The songs were going to be originally made for the film, but there was going to be one needle drop which would have been Unchained Melody, the song sung by Elvis Presley. And this would have been the song that Richard Bad Guy would have sung, where he would have embraced his feelings for Leonardo DiCaprio. This was to give a bit of a style, a bit of a consistent thing between the Moosion Impossible film. When the first film had You're a Devil in Disguise play, the second would have had Unchained Melody. And even the third, at the time, when it was going to be a trilogy, had one of its own already picked. Richard Bad Guy was going to be the emotional drive of the musical, as I felt his character was a lot more embracing. People felt he'd be a bit more familiar than Agent Josh. He would be a bit more of a likable character along that way too. He had that emotional drive, that emotional arc, that I feel would have been infinitely easier for people to connect with. And Leonardo DiCaprio too would have had a much larger focus in the musical with his own subplot. He would have teamed up with Tama, Cisco, and a new puppet character named Crispy Bacon in an attempt to break into the prison so they can break Richard Bad Guy out, as Leonardo DiCaprio wants to save him. But all this would have had some tension as he was being chased and hunted down by an unknown bounty hunter. Back in the prison, Agent Josh grows a beard to become, hard and brooding and such, as he forms a pack with Jeroma, Kevin, and Yevgeny, as they plan their escape from the prison. At one point, Josh and Richard would have started a prison fight and be sent to a couples therapy, where the solution is for them to be handcuffed to each other. You can see some elements of this concept actually make it into Cowabunga, where the whole thing was I wanted to have Josh and Richard be formed into a very tight, compact thing together, where they have to work together, even though they hate each other's guts. The prison break would have been caused by a jail dance revolution during the jail music show. Richard would sing Unchained Melody, and the jail warden would let Richard go because of how beautiful the song was. The crew all unites, but as they're escaping, they get cornered off by the bounty hunter, who is finally caught up, only to be revealed as Yama, the Hindu god of death. To be continued. Pitch 2, Moosion Impossible: The Final Moosion. The Final Moosion was originally envisioned to be the follow-up to the musical, continuing its plot lines and focusing on being a rock and roll action adventure with a lot of needle drops and such. But I wanted to focus on doing something a bit more unique, so I ended up making Frankenstein in college instead for my fall semester project. And a singular sequel to Moosion Impossible was now going to be made for spring 2024 instead of the original idea for a trilogy. The musical was dropped due to a ton of expected production complications. I wanted to make something that wasn't just another action movie as well. But the final nail in the musical's coffin was Movie Mondays. New Ames Film Club Productions began to be shown at Hope Squad Movie Mondays as the start of the most recent year, Moosion Impossible was shown to start the year off for the Movie Mondays, with a phenomenal smash success. And so we began to work a bit more closely with Hope Squad on making and putting these movies together. And they wanted to have us be there a bit more regularly and less franchise stuff. So people would be, oh look, it's a new movie by Film Club. And we also talked about event films that tied into holidays. And so that's where Frankenstein in College and A Very Yevgeny Christmas were conceived to be properly done. And so those were pushed forward as the musical was cancelled. But another huge thing was complications with getting everybody on board again initially. As it's very time consuming to do a movie, so it was easier to do something that was off on its own, a separate thing, so we could save all that work for Moosion Impossible 2, which was now going to be one singular film. But now, the final Moosion would no longer be a simple 25-minute long film like the previous ones were. It was now hoping to be the Film Club's first ever feature-length film. It was now going along the lines of being a road trip film, as the crew comes back together for one more mission, hoping to act as a metaphor for senior trips and just graduating in general, as the one final ride of everyone all together. Agent Josh and Richard Badguy would have shared a dual protagonist story, as Leonardo DiCaprio is captured and held hostage by an unknown figure. It was either going to be Yama, or actually in fact, aliens. This pitch acts similar in a lot of ways to how Cowabunga ended up being, with a small selection of changes along the way. Following the release of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, we opted to make something a bit more serious and mature. We wanted to make something which would push every aspect of our filmmaking in a whole new direction, trying to advance everything we've done before in every single way. All with hopes that we'd be able to make something truly fascinating to think about, that a bunch of high schoolers were able to do this. I mean, we focused more on having a variety of action sequences and character traits, and the 80s action hero who will not stop until what needs to be done is done, the pure evil villain. We opted for someone that had the twist of who's secretly behind the curtains, and that's what ultimately became Cowabunga. We even got the name changed from Final Moosion to Cowabunga, as Cowabunga's title was given in fall of 2023 and was meant to be kept a secret, mixing a cow pun with surfer slang to make a really cool sequel name. Development slowed down as the main focus was shifted towards making Frankenstein in College and A Very Yevgeny Christmas. But once those projects were done, pre-production began. Pre-production started on December 26, 2023, the day A Very Yevgeny Christmas was completed, as its bonus features were published. So began the biggest pre-production for a film I've ever worked on. Even more astounding, it was 4 times as large as anything I've done before. Pre-production was wrapped up on February 5th, 2024, with a completed script that was over 130 pages long, with all major cast and crew from the first Mission Impossible and A Very Yevgeny Christmas already agreeing to return. Plus, the high school rock band Soul Tribute was in talks to score the film, with location counseling coming from the Utah Film Commission. This was also the first film we've made where we ever actually had storyboards that helped us with planning shot by shot. So when we got on set, we were way more familiar with what exactly needed to be done. It helped communicate with the cast and crew a lot easier. The production budget was $1,500 and was all self-funded by returning writer and director, me, Tristen Fry. All with a slated release for May 3rd, 2024. Production went into full swing starting on February 22nd, 2024, and concluding on May 28th, 2024. A grueling 3-month production that was full of chaotic memories. This was my most difficult film in every case. With such a large cast, it became a problem with having consistency. Although I wrote in mind that it would be difficult to get everyone on set at the exact same time, we still ran into various issues with that. I mean, there were some scenes where we had it filmed on separate days. Even though it's the exact same scene, it's because I could only get certain people at certain times, which became a massive complication, but we ultimately powered through. Some of these issues did lead to major rewrites, most commonly on the day of filming. Some scenes had to change entirely right before filming, and sometimes you just had to cut your losses and keep going. A lot of complications came in regards to Big Papa and Yama. Both of their respective actors were near impossible to get a hold of, which led to some cut scenes and changed sequences. It led to a lot of changes in regards to Richard Badguy's character, and as to why he became more of a side character, as Big Papa was a vital character to Richard Bad Guy's arc. And then due to the difficulty of getting Yama, the third act underwent a ton of changes, which is why it became so chopped up. In fact, the third act, as seen in the film, isn't even in the order it was supposed to be in the originally envisioned script. That's how catastrophic it got. I had some actors just flat out have something come up in the middle of filming, say they'd be back, and then they never respond for nearly 2-3 days. There are some days where I got there, got prepared for filming, and then someone says, oh, well, I just had something come up and can't show up. And then a million other things where sometimes there's an outside scene and it thundered. Very fun. And other times there's stuff like location issues, where we had much more advanced locations. In previous films, like in Frankenstein and College, it was just inside of the school, but now we had something where it was outside, where we filmed from ranges of hospitals to Toad's Fun Zones, and a million other places, to where it became really difficult with getting some locations, as it turns out not a lot of places were actually film ready and knew the restrictions in regards to doing something like that. A major sequence which got cut was a sword fight between Richard Bad Guy and Yama, and would have served as the emotional climax of the film. The actual scene that ended up being was the scene where it's Agent Josh versus the guy in the mask with the mustache on it. That was meant to be the sword fight, where it was going to be Richard Bad Guy versus Yama. But then Tristen was sick, and then Avi turned out to be out of town, and I wasn't informed of this, so then we just had to just completely remove the scene. Which, it was really hard doing that, because me and Brockton, who was helping film that day, were already there, and we only had one real chance to do this scene. And so we just had to power through and make it up as we go. Now, the scene of it, me fighting someone with Leonardo DiCaprio, was something that was meant to happen. It was just supposed to happen earlier in the movie, and we just had to mix everything together. And although these issues were terrible, sometimes things just happen because they do. There's nothing that really can be done about some of these things, and you can get caught up on them and get mad and yell at people, or you can just sit down and think it through and figure out what's your next step. Remember, the whole work over just a small piece. Although all the pieces what builds the work, there's a point where you have to say, I have to kind of let loose a little. Time became an enemy of this film, as we could have spent the whole school year making this movie. I mean, when you think about it, we filmed a whole 95-minute movie in 3 months, when typically it takes almost a whole month just to film one of our basic 25-minute long movies. And that is still a pretty harsh production on everyone who works on it. Release kept on being delayed to the point where the film wasn't even completed by the end of the year. It had to premiere 3 days after school went out. But everyone put forth a lot of effort and care, helping bring out the vision for a measly little high school film. Everyone did a great job with this. Although not everything was able to happen, a lot was still accomplished. Soul Tribute was at least able to make one battle song for the film. It managed to exceed the feature-length mark, drone cameras, fight scenes, all these different sequences, characters, a whole attempt at an actual complex villain with Yama. And although not everything did manage to fully go as I wanted, it still was complete. We did so much more than I thought we ever could accomplish. As a creative lead, it is an important thing to learn that not everything can happen, and that's okay, especially when it's just you and your friends. Be proud of what you managed to accomplish, even if it wasn't everything you wanted to do when you first set out to do this. Yes, it is great when everything can be done, and it is remarkable the things some people have been able to accomplish. But don't compare yourselves to the greats, and know that you're simply doing one step at a time to learn that way. And the biggest thing to learn is that everything matters, every detail matters, every memory you make is just as important as the final product. A 30-second scene which I filmed with the CIA characters just outside of a building was a whole hour and a half, 2 hour long filming. But we made so many memories, so many fun jokes. It's such a great time. Don't get caught up in trying to do things perfectly, and know that it's important that you're with your friends. And that's the one thing I think that this film dragged a bit away of me from, where I got so focused on completing this film, I lost that it was important for me to still be with my friends, and be me, be who I was with them, more than just the director, but be their friend. And so that's why I really see why a lot of people greatly prefer doing the short films when they do stuff like this, as it's less grueling. I mean, these 3 months were some of the most difficult I've ever had when it came to anything, because school was still an issue, work was still a thing, but so it was for everyone. And so you gotta understand that when something just can't happen. Be happy with the time and memories you made with them instead of that things didn't go perfectly. Because if you made it with passion and care, people will see it and know that at the end of the day, it may not have been perfect, but people know that you cared for this when you made it. It has been an important lesson which I learned while making Moosion Impossible Cowabunga, the story which built this film.